do you find that just the medium of film alone is going to shine a much brighter spotlight on this topic than has previously been possible?
Yes, and I have to qualify that with the fact that it's a good film, as you pointed out, I think really makes the difference. I think it's on a trajectory right now to be potentially seen by millions or maybe even tens of millions of people, especially with the way it's getting a limited but growing release starting next week. Then CNN picks it up, and it's going to get coverage probably internationally on television, cable TV because of that. So, yeah, I think it's taking the conversation to a broader demographic than have the animal, the anti-captivity movement's been able to reach thus far. So, yeah, absolutely.
So when you were approached to become a participant in the project, what was the main thing you wanted to convey, the main thing that you wanted to make sure the film did?
Well, let me give you a 30-second response. I am now a physician. I wasn't connected to the industry, so when Dawn was killed, it led to me being asked to appear on Anderson Cooper, and that led to like a Wolf Blitzer, a couple interviews, and then it led to me and another guy named Dr. John Jett, who's also in the film, being part of a piece in Outside Magazine called Killer in the Pool, which kind of was written by Tim Zimmerman, the great writer from Outside. And so Gabriela kind of discovered that article, and then through Tim reached out to John and I. So we were asked to participate. We didn't really go in with an agenda. We were just happy that someone was, first of all, we were happy that Tim Zimmerman wrote an article about it. Second of all, we were happy that another guy named David Kirby wrote a book called Death at SeaWorld that just came out in paperback this week. And thirdly, now it's become a movie. Unfortunately, it took the circumstances of Dawn being killed to bring out the story of captivity in general. So I didn't go into it with a background of activism. I've kind of become a de facto voice. I was provided a voice just by a lot of it was just pure circumstance and the fact that I was separated from the industry, which is a very secretive one. So people that are still in the industry, no matter if they're working at a different park or maybe they're working at a zoo somewhere, are very reluctant to speak out. So I think we were almost brought into this conversation by default, and it's just continued to build since February 2010.
So how many years were you a trainer at SeaWorld?
I was there for 8 years, from 1987 to 95. After SeaWorld, I went back to school and became a doctor. So I practiced in Washington State. And one of the interesting things about several of the trainers, in fact, Carol Ray and Samantha Berg and John Jett, is training Shamu doesn't really prepare you for any other type of job. And so we all had to kind of go back to school and, get postgraduate degrees. And so that's a similar story with the four of us. There are a couple people in the film, John Hargrove and Bridget Pirtle and Kim Ashdown, that left in 2010, 11, and 12, respectively. And they left much later than we did. So they kind of have maybe the looming shadow of SeaWorld still in their rearview mirror, whereas we're far enough removed temporally that we're not quite as concerned about like retribution. Although I suppose there could be legal activity, but we're hoping that none of that happens.
I mean, have you encountered any resistance personally from SeaWorld?
I was explaining this to Carol, one of the other girls in the film. We both flew out of Seattle yesterday, and we were talking about it. It seemed like when we first kind of came out as former trainers, kind of speaking out against the industry, not really going after SeaWorld, but really just telling the same story that you saw in the movie, just really kind of saying those things. We were, some of the, I think, people, not really SeaWorld. SeaWorld's been remarkably silent thus far, although I don't think that's going to continue. But, people that we knew, they like to label you as a crazy activist, even though none of us really came from a background of activism. But as this thing has gained more momentum with Tim's article and David's book and now the film, more and more people are starting to, want to be on this bandwagon, I guess you could say, because it seems to be a growing movement. And I think globally the whole issue of animal rights is growing in general. I mean, killer whales and elephants and apes and a variety of different animals that have shown the ability to have culture and use tools and be self-aware and recognize themselves in a mirror and grieve their young. And it's probably just going to be a matter of years or decades until animals like killer whales and dolphins have legal protection under the law. They're currently treated as property, which allows for corporations to just trade them however they see fit.
You know, I live in Lakeland, which is right outside of Orlando, so this area is kind of steeped in the SeaWorld tourist culture.
Yeah, I grew up in Orlando, so I know right where you're at.
Yeah, exactly. So the only answer really to this, the only remedy to this, is for them to release the whales in their natural environment and just nix that program altogether.
The way that I see it unfolding, and you might be right, this is just the way that my viewpoint is that some of the whales, including Tilikum, aren't fit to be released. They've got damaged teeth from being in captivity. They're deconditioned. A lot of them have been mixed from different parts of the world, and there's always a risk of spreading a viral or bacterial disease to a native population. So I'm not sure that the scientific community is ready to just set them free. I think that there are certain animals that are in captivity. For example, Lolita, who lives by herself in the Miami Seaquarium, is probably one of the better candidates for release because her teeth are all intact, which is unlike many of the SeaWorld whales. And her mother and family are still alive in Washington State. So the notion of releasing her to, like, do a soft release to a sea pen, which is basically, as you know, maybe a cove with a net at the opening of it, up in the San Juan Islands would work for her. Maybe another possible animal like Morgan at Laurel Parquet that was stranded a couple of years ago. She might be a good candidate for release. But on average, most of the killer whales at SeaWorld probably aren't good candidates for release. So what I see happening is them losing whales via attrition. But at some point, SeaWorld's going to have to stop breeding them. They're breeding them as fast as they can reproduce them. In fact, they're using artificial insemination and just impregnating them as quickly as, on their first ovulation after they have a kid, is the way they're doing it.
When you mentioned the teeth, just to make sure our listeners know, the damage that they do to their teeth is a direct result of being confined in such a small space, correct?
Exactly. Specifically, they do a behavior called jaw popping. If you look at a place like Shamu Stadium in Florida, there's 7 pools, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, 7 pools. And between all these pools, they have steel segregation gates. This is what allows them to separate maybe 1 or 2 animals out into the performance pool to do a show. But because you've got animals from different family groupings, they don't always get along, and they do. Have you ever seen like 2 dogs on either side of a fence? How they might bark more aggressively at each other when they're separated by that fence, and then when you open the fence up, they kind of stop barking. A similar thing happens with killer whales. They do a behavior called jaw popping, and sometimes they'll chomp down on the horizontal steel bars, and it knocks out their teeth. For example, Tilikum has no teeth left on his bottom jaw. And when they knock the enamel off their teeth, it exposes a fleshy pulp, just like you and I have pulp in the middle of our tooth. And so the vets come in and they bore out the center of the tooth in basically what's a root canal procedure, but it's called a pulpotomy because they don't fill it with any cement. So for the rest of the animal's lives, they use a water pick with a betadine solution, and they have to flush the core of that tooth out 2 or 3 times a day to prevent the animals from getting infections. So that's one of the reasons why an animal like Tilikum could not be released without ongoing human intervention. You could do the same thing in a sea pen, but some of these animals require a lot of medical care, including activities and antibiotics and so on and so forth. So, yeah, some animals are better candidates for release than others. The byproduct of captivity is broken teeth. This broken teeth leads to a lot of infection and daily teeth flushings. They flush the teeth every day. And the funny thing is that SeaWorld takes this tooth flushing, and when people ask questions, because they have to do it 3 times a day, and people will ask, what is that trainer doing? They qualify it as superior dental care, but they don't tell the public that the animals are breaking their teeth because of captivity. You know what I mean? It's a brilliant PR move, but people just don't know that. So they go, oh my God, look at these animals are getting such great care in captivity. Isn't captivity great? And
and it seems like a no-brainer, because if you place any living thing in an extremely confined space, eventually it will wreck their health and
exactly.
drive them nutty. But is there any way to know if in these deaths that have been documented and reported, if these whales think that they're playing with the trainers, or if there's actual malice involved?
I think, and you'd have to go case by case on that. And SeaWorld does keep a record of incidents, at least a partial record. And for example, Don Branchell's incident was anything but play. SeaWorld wanted to spin it as play because, from a public relations standpoint, they wanted people, as you saw in the film, they first said she slipped and fell and drowned. It was only until public pressure from eyewitnesses did they go back in their huddle and change the story. And then now, even still to this day, people don't realize the brutality of that killing. Alexis Martinez and Laurel Parquet, and also in the movie, was brutally rammed and killed. Some of the incidents, like the one where the trainer gets smushed in the film, that's debatable. Was it an accident? Some people argue that these whales don't make accidents, but others say that was just bad timing. So it's hard to say. You'd have to go on a case-by-case basis.
When were your eyes open to this problem?
Yeah, I had to start making the documentary before my eyes were open to any of this. Before my eyes opened at all. I didn't understand why. I heard about the incident of Don Brancho, a top SeaWorld trainer, being killed by a killer whale, and I didn't understand how this could have happened. I just thought that killer whales didn't kill human beings, and I thought that they actually we got along well with them, and especially in a place like SeaWorld. And so when I found that out, I thought I was, going to be sort of doing a larger philosophical piece about a philosophical film about, human beings and our relationships with our predator counterparts. And it was only when I started kind of peeling back the onion that I realized that suddenly I would be making an entirely different film.
Mm-hmm. Well, in the direction that it ultimately went, I mean, you're taking on or taking to task a major industry. Was that a scary prospect for you?
Oh, yeah. It's funny, I'm not, I think 12 years ago or whatever, I might have envisioned myself being this crusader documentarian one day, but now that I'm a mom and have a husband and basically a big corporation can drain my bank account in a day, suddenly it's not necessarily it's really just just overall, I guess, without any of that kind of, legal scariness. I think the point is that I'm just not really a combative person, just by nature, and my films have all been sort of much gentler and much, and very kind of inspiring, and I don't, I guess these are awkward shoes for me to fill. I think there are people out there who do this much better than I do the controversy thing much better than I do. And so as a result, these are strange shoes for me to fill, but I know that I knew when I learned the truth that the mandate was to tell the truth. And,
absolutely. There's no other way to do it. I mean, it has to be yeah. Let me ask you just a quick question I was interested in about the art of documentary filmmaking. How do you, because you spent a couple of years on this project, I believe. It might sound like a silly question, but how do you know when you're done? How do you know when you have everything you need?
Yeah, I think that you. It's a very good question. I think you have to, at some point. Well, to be perfectly honest, I think you run out of money, and your investors have had it up to here with you, and are like, just finish the thing, for goodness sakes. But I mean, for me, I think I knew that once I had, uncovered, or I guess once I marched down, I had a specific narrative that I was trying to tell, and I needed to tell it in a fact-driven and truthful way. And, I wouldn't be done until I could do that. I wasn't done. I knew I couldn't stop until I marched us from 40 years back all the way to the present day, and to the incident of Don being killed by a killer whale. I knew that was my trajectory, and because that was, I actually, I sort of, essentially, I picked one story to tell. I told sort of Tillicum's story through the eyes of the trainers, and I wanted to start at his capture. Almost 40 years back, and end up at the fateful day in 2010.
Yeah.
So until I felt that I had done that storyline just factual justice, I didn't stop. So it was a 2-year process.
It's a lot of dedication to be a documentary filmmaker. And they say about films in general that films aren't finished as much as they're abandoned. And I think that's never so true as with a documentary.
Gorgeous. That's hilarious. Yeah,
so
it's very blue collar too with documentarians, like documentary. Like you're hacking at it and learning and figuring. It's the most. I think it's the blue collar version of filmmaking. It becomes just perseverance and getting told no, and then getting told no again on the next day. So nothing glamorous about it. So I think deep down inside, you are waiting for it to end, but you also know that you have to unearth something, and until you do that, you can't cut tape.
And the beautiful thing about documentaries is that they have more than any other film form, really. They do have a power to alter perception and inspire action. And so when you've traveled the world with your documentary to different festivals and things, what's been most heartening for you in the response that you've received from audiences?
I think I think people becoming just generally aware of what it was that they were doing, taking their kids to marine parks. I think people becoming aware of just what big corporations can do for to worker standards. There's just so many levels of awareness that I felt I underwent, in making the film, and that I experienced while making the film, that I was just hoping that if I told the story properly, with nothing particularly manipulative or hysterical shoehorned in there, and that if I stuck to the facts and stuck to telling the story in a truthful way, that people would experience that same kind of awareness. I mean, you just it runs the gamut. I think that's the most heartening, I guess, is just people saying, I never thought twice about this, and now I'm aware, because that was exactly my experience, and because me making this film was a constant process of discovery. So that was my experience too. So it was nice to hear that echoed back from my audience.
Absolutely. Just one more question for you, because I know you're pressed for time. SeaWorld has remained pretty mum on your film and this whole dilemma, haven't they?
Yeah, we haven't heard a lot from the SeaWorld camp. I think they've issued a couple statements in the press that the film fails to speak about how they care about their trainers and their whales. But beyond that, we haven't heard really a peep, and don't really know what will happen in the future.
It will probably change once this gets aired on, I believe, CNN and gets released in theaters, and you would expect that to change, wouldn't you?
I can only hope. I mean, a lot of people think we're advocating for SeaWorld to shut its doors, and we're actually not at all. We actually think that a $2 billion a year industry, $2 billion a year industry, is probably one of the only, industries that actually could have the financial resources to evolve marine parks into rehabilitation and release centers. They could institute, sea pens whereby you sort of cordon off a cove with a net, in the ocean, and you essentially sort of, retire your whales, your killer whales, to the ocean. And, you're still able to keep your eye on them, and, for health reasons. A lot of, they can't be really released in the wild because they're on antibiotics, they'll probably die, and they don't know how to eat live fish and chase down their own food. So, a sea pen, where you can actually, where a whale can live out a dignified life and, and actually be a whale for the first time, I think would be a tremendous step in the right direction. And I think they're one of the only people with the financial resources to afford shifting the whole belief system in that direction.
And the other part of the equation, of course, is the consumer demand. And I can't imagine that people seeing your film won't be kind of outraged and show their outrage with their pocketbook. That's
right. I mean, no change will come if people still go through those turnstiles. Generally we have to be active consumers and think with our pocketbooks, and we're the ones to encourage them to be able to change. I mean, this movie will come and go, but we're the ones who are able to sort of, demand much more for, the whales and the trainers.